Jennifer Reece. I work for HP Inc. and my title is Global Lead of Sustainable Materials Innovation. And I've been working in sustainability and green chemistry for about 10 years. My favorite part of my current role is I get to investigate new materials. And what this means is we make our products and our packaging out of materials we've used for a long time. So, products can be a lot of plastics and metals, and for packaging, it's like paper and plastics. So with the new materials, we're looking at alternative materials that could be incorporated into our products and packaging that have less impact from an environmental perspective and social perspective. So the circular economy is really where we're trying to make the whole system more circular, more of a loop. So if you think about when you're making products, you want to incorporate more recycled materials or even reused parts into those products. And then when the product's in use, the customer's using it and hopefully, it lasts as long as they need and it's repairable. And then when the customer's done with it, then we don't want to just recycle that product, which might have happened in the past. We want to reuse it if possible. So that's kind of the first step, is to see if that product can be reused. And it might need some light repair, what we call refurbishment. And then really, if we're at the point where that can't be reused, then it would be recycled. And then those materials could feed back into the new product. So it's kind of this whole loop. As my knowledge of sustainability has evolved, it really means trying to reduce impacts as much as possible when we're making products. Because people are going to want to continue to have, their phones and their PCs and printers, and it's really the responsibility of companies to figure out how to make those products more sustainable. Consumers play a part where they, should demand of companies that you should make products that we feel good about using. But I think it's really up to the companies to try to figure out how to continue to make products that are reducing our impacts from the environmental, social perspective, and maximizing the materials and products being used. Keep on using them at their highest value that is possible. From the circularity perspective, there are finite resources. We will run out of some of these materials in the future if changes aren't made to recycle them more, or even reduce the usage of certain materials. What we found is that because there are many customers asking for sustainable products, we can often make the case that if we incorporate recycled materials or make things more sustainable from the packaging perspective, even though it might cost more sometimes, we can justify it because of the increased sales, to customers. Part of what my team does is we're trying to innovate to develop solutions that help us achieve our sustainability goals without adding a lot of extra cost. And when there's new materials especially, and that's a lot of what I'm working on, at first the costs might be higher, but then as more and more companies that supply those materials have those available, and as companies start demanding them more, then it scales up and the costs come down. So that's part of what we try to look at, is try to predict a bit, okay, if we could scale this up, then we could get to a point where it doesn't cost as much. So when we're evaluating new materials, there's a lot of different aspects to look at to make sure they're sustainable. We use a tool called life cycle analysis, where we're looking at all the impacts of materials from when they're, extracted from the earth to manufacturing use phase and then end of life. And some of those things they're looking at are carbon footprint, water usage, and there's also chemical usage considered in that. And then there's also the social considerations. So if you're sourcing a material, if it's coming from a mining operation, are those workers in a safe, under safe working conditions? And then there's like through the whole manufacturing phase, you know, are those workers in our manufacturing facilities, do they have a good living wage? Do they have rights as far as not being exposed to toxic chemicals, you know, that kind of thing. And then the use phase, you want to think about, you know, is there anything with the product itself? And then the end of life, you know, can you recycle those materials as part of the consideration? If you can't recycle it, then it's maybe not that sustainable. So my background is science, so I was a physics major and then became a reliability engineer. So I worked to help test products, inkjet printers, and make sure they're going to work well for customers and didn't have any major issues. So I did that for a long time and then was interested in getting involved in sustainability just from my own kind of what I'm passionate about. We had a sustainability club on site that I took over leadership of that. And so through that, I was kind of like wanting to change what I was working on. And so I started looking for jobs in the sustainability area. It actually took like 2 years. So you have to be patient sometimes. If you want to change something in your career, you know, it's not going to usually happen overnight. So that was about 10 years ago. And I've actually, changed organizations, changed managers, changed responsibilities, but never applied for a new job since then. So it's evolved within that job. Where, you know, I have always managed programs related to sustainable materials in my role, but it was a lot of regulation-based work back then. And then it just evolved over time where I moved more and more into leadership work. And that was really partly because of my desire to do something different. And so as we hired some new employees, then I passed on some work to them and moved into more of the leadership work and helping to set goals and manage those goals, and then working with external organizations as well. If you think about mushrooms, if you see mushrooms growing in a forest, a lot of what people don't know is their root matrix is really large underneath any mushroom patches you see, and it's often connected underneath the ground. And so it's called mycelium, and it's something that we're working with companies that develop foam that can replace like EPS, which is expanded polystyrene foam, you know, if you think of styrofoam. It can replace that for packaging, so it can protect products just like styrofoam does. Like they could take wood chips or any kind of like plant-based fibers, and they grow this root matrix onto that. And they basically have a mold they can grow it into. Then, you know, they kind of stop the growth. They heat it up enough to stop the growth. And then that can be used as a cushioning material. So it's really cool because it's very sustainable. These are totally biodegradable. One of the things that's hard to figure out as a young person is like, what am I going to do to, you know, earn a living and potentially go to school and all that? And I think it's like, you know, figure out something you're passionate about, that you're interested in, that can hopefully, you know, pay, that you can get a job in. But I think the important thing is learning from the people, you know, whether it's teachers or coworkers, and from the experiences you have along the way, that, you know, being open-minded to learn things from people and from those experiences you have, because then that can help you evolve in your understanding of the world and what you want to do and of yourself, right?